Best Before is a film which is about the London food revolution, mainly about people growing food in London and why they're doing it. It was inspired because we met someone, a prominent academic, who warned of food riots in the UK. So this was the same time as the riots going on in London. And we were really interested, what was the link between more and more people in London growing food and the possibility of food riots over rising food prices. So Best Before is a film which looks at the connection between the two things. I used to work as a researcher in Brighton and then went to Vietnam, and I worked for an NGO which did lots of different stuff, but among those things it looked at sustainable agriculture, organic agriculture, and the reasons for it. I also did a bit of work in Guatemala on food projects, but when I came to London to do a bit more studying on masters, I realised that a lot of the problems with the food system were the same problems in London as people were facing in different parts of the world. I think what we aimed to do by making Best Before was to show all of the people who are working to change the food system, to show that food is actually important to everybody, it affects everyone, and it is wider than just what you eat for your meals. It affects everything. It affects the health of the city, of people, it affects the environment, the water, the air, and it really affects the economy as well. Food actually underpins our societies, our culture. It's vital. I think there are many, many problems, and there are many people who talk about this, many experts in this field. I would say that the most glaring one is that we have a world population of over 6 billion, and 1 billion go hungry every day, and 1 billion, roughly equal numbers, suffer from overweight and obesity. So straight away there seems to be a massive problem, and when we think about issues around food, we kind of think of very poor countries, and that's certainly the case, but also we have huge amounts of problems, and we see huge problems here in London. Issues around obesity. It seems to be the poorest who are the most obese because they don't have access to fresh, healthy food. The environment's a huge one. Close to a third of greenhouse gas emissions are related to agriculture. It heavily uses water sources. Pesticides and oil is a massive problem now. People are talking about energy costs rising and rising and rising. The food system is incredibly oil dependent, which means that with future energy prices going up, food prices are likely to increase. The key change people talk about is when production costs, so what the farmer was paying to produce the food, was decoupled, so was removed from the price that people paid for that good. So which meant a downward trend for farmers, because that was the rise of the food processors and food retailers. So what we saw was before, governments would have a big role in buying food from farmers and setting prices, so farmers got a fair price and consumers didn't pay too much. When that was removed, because that was seen as ineffective and wasteful, and perhaps it was, this is what Felicity Lawrence from The Guardian in the film talks about a lot, is that this was a key moment, because what it meant was the supermarkets in the UK, the big four supermarkets, that was the point where they took off from the 1980s, and with them the food processors. So that key link in the chain from producer to consumer to us eating the food, they grew in power massively. So what we see now in the UK is farmers going out of business because they cannot compete. So you have to go to a bigger scale, which is more oil intensive. At the same time, we're starting to see food prices rise. And this happens throughout the world because we have a global production system. And so what we have now are farmers who can't really compete, and they're going out of business. And you see high suicide rates in India, you see big problems in America and the UK. And at the same time, consumers facing rising costs. So it's a bit of a mess, but in the middle, there are a lot of people doing very, very well out of it and making a lot of money. So Best Before is saying, we can't ignore the supermarkets. This is at the heart of the problem. When we had our premiere, there were people asking, well, yeah, but we all use it and we're all very busy. And that's true. And people are very busy, and people can't always afford, in terms of time and money, to go to independent shops. So what we're saying is that it's individual choice in that There are many alternatives, but it's also structural and political. The most worrying thing we're seeing in London is that it's the wealthy who can afford to eat well. And I think that's a huge problem. So food has never been so cheap until the last 5 years. But what food are we talking about? And I think the processed food, very like sugar high, fatty food, is very cheap. And it's much cheaper to eat processed food than it is to eat healthy food. And there's a lot of snobbery and there's a lot of class issues around food. And I think a lot of people say that, people eat badly because that's their choice. But I think it's structural as well as choice. So you have to have affordable, healthy food. Otherwise people will eat what they can afford. Across London, we're seeing a huge rise in the number of growing sites. So that might be small roof gardens, like the Dalston Roof Gardens, Food from the Sky up in Crouch End, or bigger market gardens like Cultivate London, Organically, and several others, which are growing food on a more commercial basis to sell. And we're seeing more and more food cooperatives, which are an alternative to supermarkets. So there are so many different things happening, and Best Before tries to show how there's a logic and a new possible food system emerging from these different projects going on. I think there are many things which people can do. I think a really key one is ideally to get involved with a local growing site or to volunteer at a local city farm or market garden. I think that's great, but obviously a lot of people don't want to do that. That's fine. I think to change where you buy your food is key. I think that's the most important thing, and I think that's what people, if they can and if they have time, that's vital. So there are two main ways which I think that's really important to do. To find your closest organic farm outside London, or within London. Organically offers vegetable boxes, and to buy straight from them. And it's so easy. So you get a vegetable box delivered weekly, and it actually works out cheaper than if you went and bought those vegetables or whatever individually. The other thing is food co-ops. So there's lots of co-op finders where you can find your local co-op. And a food co-op basically is an alternative to a supermarket. So you would buy in bulk your rice, your grains, some vegetables, cooking oil, all of these things. And it functions more like a kind of a drop-off point for food. So you reduce the amount of packagings, there's less waste of food, and you're providing a good alternative to the supermarket. We have created the system that we have now. We all shop in supermarkets, or not all of us, but many of us shop in supermarkets. Because we're busy, because we don't have time. But that also means that we as individuals and societies and communities have an immense amount of power to change the way that we live, the way that we buy our food, grow our food. We have immense amount of power to reshape the communities in which we live as well. And everyone has that power by where you go out and buy your food. And what is so exciting about these alternatives is that they are providing affordable, healthy food, and they are growing in number. So it's no longer saying, okay, if you have money, you can eat well. I think this will be a revolution in the sense that it will mean that everybody can eat healthily.